The survey ship Harmonious Dawn drifted through the outer edge of an unmapped star system, its sensors cataloging the third planet from the yellow star when something unexpected appeared on the screens, and Commander Thelsh leaned forward in his chair, his scales shifting to a concerned purple as he studied the readings before him. "Impossible," whispered Science Officer Krentel, her antennae twitching rapidly with agitation and confusion that spread through the bridge crew like rippling water across a still pond. The readings showed artificial satellites, orbital stations, and the unmistakable energy signatures of faster-than-light drives in this primitive world, which should have been centuries away from such technology, had somehow achieved what took most species millennia to accomplish on their own. Elch activated the communication protocols, broadcasting the standard Concordat greeting in 47 languages, both verbal and mathematical, waiting for a response that would welcome another species into the galactic community and expand their coalition of peaceful civilizations. Once more the reply came in broken Concordat standard, clearly run through primitive translation software, but the message was clear enough. "This is Earth Defense Command, and we acknowledge your presence, but request you maintain your current position while we dispatch a diplomatic vessel to your location within the hour." "They have a defense command," Krentel said, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of amusement and concern that academics displayed when encountering something that challenged their theories and models of civilization. "Development throughout known space before?" Thelsh could respond. The proximity alarms screamed across every console, and the view screen filled with a sight that turned his blood cold and sent ice through his veins despite the warm temperature maintained for his comfort. The Devourers had arrived in this system too, their massive organic ships tearing through space like wounds in reality itself, and the swarm that had consumed 6 sectors was now bearing down on this primitive world. And its moon with hungry intent. "Get those humans on the line now," Thelsh shouted, abandoning all diplomatic protocol as he watched the Devourer fleet number in the hundreds. Far more than his single survey ship could ever hope to engage or even temporarily slow down the human diplomat appeared on screen. A female with brown skin and dark hair pulled back severely, her uniform crisp and her expression nervingly calm given the approaching apocalypse visible on every sensor reading throughout the system. "Commander Thelsh, I am Admiral Chen of Earth Defense Command, and I see you have brought company to our system," she said, without any trace of the panic he expected from a species facing extinction within hours of their first contact with alien life. "Admiral, you must evacuate immediately," Thelsh said, his translator struggling to convey the urgency he felt burning through every nerve in his body and mind at once and repeatedly. "Those are Devourers, a swarm that has destroyed entire civilizations and consumed 6 sectors of space. And your world has perhaps 6 hours before they begin harvesting everything living on your planet's surface and in the surrounding orbital space." Admiral Chen's expression did not change, which disturbed Thelsh more than screaming would have done in that moment of crisis and pending doom for her entire species. "Commander, we appreciate the warning, and we have been tracking the hostile fleet since they entered our detection range 40 minutes ago," she said. And something in her tone made Thelsh's scales ripple, with an unfamiliar sensation he would later identify as primal fear. "We are not evacuating. An Earth Defense Command is mobilizing our fleet to engage the enemy, and we request tactical data on Devourer ship classifications, weapons capabilities, and any weakness you have identified during your encounters with them over the years. You cannot fight them," Thelsh said, his voice rising to pitch that his species used only in moments of extreme distress and mortal terror beyond normal comprehension. "You are a newly spacefaring species with primitive weapons and no experience in combat operations. While they have consumed billions of lives across hundreds of worlds and no single species has ever stood against them successfully in open battle, then we will be the first," Admiral Chen replied. And behind her, Thelsh could see dozens of humans moving with quick efficiency, calling out coordinates and deployment orders without any visible fear or hesitation in their movements. The Harmonious Dawn's sensors detected ships launching from Earth, from its moon, from orbital stations, and even from the fourth planet in the system, and within minutes. Over 200 human vessels had formed a defensive perimeter between the Devourers and their homeworld. With systematic precision, they are going to die, Krentel whispered, her antennae drooping in sorrow for a species they had known for less than an hour but would lose just as quickly. To the unstoppable hunger Thelsh watched, the human fleet organize itself, and what he saw made no tactical sense, according to every Concordat military doctrine developed over 10,000 years of civilization and careful study of optimal defensive strategies. Human ships were not maintaining safe engagement distances or preparing for calculated drone warfare or establishing defensive positions that could be abandoned in orderly retreat if the battle turned unfavorable to their survival. Instead, they were clustering in tight formations, moving forward toward the devourer swarm, and their communication channels were filled with strange phrases that the translator struggled to process into meaning. That made any logical sense, remember the Alamo, one captain said over an open channel. That other ships acknowledged with agreement and determination that bordered on religious fervor in its intensity, death before dishonesty. Another crew chanted in unison, their voices creating a harmony that sent chills across Thelsh's scales and made him feel like he was witnessing something ancient and terrible for Earth and all her children. Admiral Chen's voice cut through every channel, clear and strong, and absolutely without fear of the approaching swarm that had broken entire civilizations before today. The first Devourer ships opened fire, their bioweapons tearing through space, and 3 human vessels disappeared in explosions of light and debris that should have sent the rest fleeing for their lives and safety. Instead, the human fleet accelerated forward, closing the distance, and Thelsh heard Admiral Chen give an order that would haunt him for the rest of his very long life and career. All ships, weapons free and engage at will, and show them why you don't mess with a Deathworld species, she said. And the human fleet crashed into the Devourer, swarmed like a wave of madness, and controlled Ferethals could only watch in growing terror as humanity entered battle for the first time on the galactic stage. And nothing in his training or experience had prepared him for what he was about to witness from this savage new species. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of Sol, and Thelsh still could not sleep properly. The images from that first engagement playing through his mind whenever he closed his eyes and tried to find rest from the memories. Concordat Council had dispatched a full diplomatic mission to Earth, along with military advisors who were supposed to help coordinate the joint defense against the Devourers. But what they found on humanity's homeworld challenged every assumption about how civilized species should behave and develop. The gravity is crushing, Ambassador Velemon complained, her exoskeleton creaking under the strain. Despite the support harness she wore constantly to prevent her body from collapsing under its own weight in this oppressive environment, SH had reviewed the planetary classification reports a dozen times, unable to believe the numbers that appeared on his screen with cold precision and undeniable accuracy, repeated in every scan. Earth was a Class 12 death world, with gravity 30% higher than Concordat standard, atmospheric pressure that would rupture the lungs of most species, and a yellow star that bombarded the surface with radiation levels considered hazardous to unshielded biological tissue everywhere else. How did intelligence evolve here? Science Officer Krentel asked, studying human biology with the fascination of a researcher who had discovered something that should not exist according to established theories of life development. Their bones are dense enough to support their mass in this gravity, and their muscles operate at efficiency levels we can barely achieve with cybernetic enhancement, and their cardiovascular system can sustain physical activity that would kill any Concordat species within minutes of starting. The humans seemed amused by their visitors' struggles, offering support harnesses and gravity-reduced zones with the casual kindness of people who did not realize they were living in conditions that qualified as a torture method by Concordat standards and conventions. Captain Maria Rodriguez of the United Earth ship Valiant had been assigned as their military liaison, and she stood in Earth's crushing gravity without any visible strain, her smile friendly as she watched the aliens struggle with simple tasks like walking or lifting objects. "You get used to it," she said, which was a lie that every Concordat member recognized immediately, but appreciated nonetheless. For its diplomatic intention and thoughtful kindness, joint military operations began badly and got worse as cultural differences became impossible to ignore or bridge through simple communication and goodwill between species. Concordat doctrine emphasized drone warfare, defensive positions, calculated retreat protocols, and acceptable loss ratios that never exceeded 3% of engaged forces in any single battle or campaign. Human doctrine emphasized something the translator could barely process into Concordat language concepts. Combined arms assault, acceptable. Casualties, and hold at all costs with a willingness to sacrifice that made veteran Concordat officers physically ill to contemplate the Battle of Proxima Station revealed the full horror of what humanity brought to warfare, and Thelsh watched the operation unfold through multiple camera feeds with growing dread that settled into his bones like Ice Devour. Hive ship had attached itself to Proxima Station, beginning the process of consuming the structure and the 3,000 Concordat civilians trapped inside. And standard doctrine called for writing off the station and destroying it before the Astaros could harvest its resources. Completely negative. Captain Rodriguez said when the Concordat fleet commander gave the order to fire on the station and end the suffering of those trapped inside quickly. "We have civilians on that station and united. Earth does not abandon its people or its allies, and we are going in to get them out regardless of the risk or cost that is suicide," Thelsh protested, his scales flashing the colors of extreme agitation and concern that any rational being should feel in this obviously hopeless situation. The Hive ship has over 10,000 Devour warriors on board, and you have one company of infantry, maybe 80 soldiers at most, and they will be slaughtered in minutes. After boarding, Rodriguez's smile did not reach her eyes, and Thelsh saw something predatory in her expression that his species had not seen in sentient beings for thousands of years of civilized development and peaceful evolution. "Watch and learn." "Commander," she said, and the human assault shuttle launched toward the Hive ship while every Concordat officer watched in horror at this violation of sensible military doctrine. The boarding action was BROADCAST, live through helmet cameras, and Thelsh forced himself to watch despite every instinct telling him to look away from the coming massacre that would claim 80 brave but foolish lives. The humans breached the hull with shaped charges, their armored forms moving into the organic corridors of the Hive ship with weapons blazing. And what followed was not a battle by Concordat standards, but something far more primal and terrible. Devourers swarmed the corridors, their claws and bioweapons tearing at the human soldiers. But the humans did not retreat or establish defensive positions or call for extraction when casualties mounted beyond acceptable levels. They advanced, meter by meter, their weapons firing in controlled bursts, and when ammunition ran low, they switched to backup weapons. And when those ran dry, they pulled out blades and fought hand-to-hand with the Devourers in close combat. "This is Corporal Jenkins," one voice called over the radio, his breathing labored but steady despite the chaos visible on his camera feed showing carnage and destruction everywhere. "I have sustained multiple lacerations and my left arm is non-functional, but I am still combat effective and continuing the mission to reach the civilian holding area on Deck 7. Thelsh watched Jenkins fight for 17 more minutes, his damaged arm hanging useless at his side while he fired his weapon one-handed and used his armored body to shield a wounded comrade from Devourer attacks with deliberate precision. When Jenkins finally collapsed from blood loss, 2 other soldiers grabbed him and dragged him forward while still fighting, refusing to leave him behind, despite the tactical inefficiency of carrying wounded during an assault operation in hostile territory. Humans cleared the Hive ship corridor by corridor, deck by deck, and lost 42 soldiers in the process, which represented a casualty rate of over 50% that should have broken any rational fighting force immediately, but they reached the civilians. secured them, and fought their way back to the extraction point. And when the last shuttle lifted off, Captain Rodriguez detonated charges placed throughout the hive ship and destroyed it completely without hesitation. Mission accomplished, she reported, her voice tired but satisfied. And behind her, Thelsh could see human soldiers slumped in exhaustion, many wounded, some dying. But all of them alive with an intensity that Concordat species had forgotten. You lost almost half your force.
Ouch,
said, unable to keep the horror from his voice or his scales from displaying his emotional state to everyone watching for 3,000 civilians. Rodriguez replied, looking directly at him through the video link with eyes that held no regret or doubt. About the cost paid today, that is an acceptable exchange rate by our standards. And every one of my soldiers knew the risks and volunteered anyway, because that is what humans do for people who cannot protect themselves in that moment. Thelsh understood that humanity had not just entered the galactic stage with advanced technology and primitive culture as he had assumed at first contact weeks ago. They had brought something the Concordat had deliberately bred out of their species over millennia of peaceful civilization. The capacity for controlled savagery, directed violence, and the willingness to pay any price for victory or the protection of others. Civilized galaxy had forgotten how to be savage, and now they watched in terror as humanity showed them what they had lost and what winning actually cost. The war was now in its third month, and the Devourer advance had slowed but not stopped. Their swarm, adapting to combined Concordat and human tactics with the horrifying efficiency that had made them the galaxy's greatest. Nightmare for Generation Thulls had been permanently assigned to the United Earth ship Valiant as senior Concordat liaison, a position he had not requested, could not refuse given the political importance of maintaining the alliance between species. So fundamentally different the human crew had adopted him, which was apparently something humans did without conscious thought or rational consideration of whether such bonding served any tactical purpose or strategic advantage in the larger conflict. Morning. Lucky, called out Lieutenant Sarah Chen from navigation, using the nickname the crew had given him after he survived a hull breach that should have killed everyone in the section but somehow left him unharmed through random chance. Morning, Thelsh replied, having learned that humans appreciated these small social rituals even in the middle of a war that threatened both their species with extinction and complete annihilation. The breakfast in the mess hall demonstrated another peculiarity of human psychology that Concordat scientists were struggling to understand or explain. Through existing models of social behavior and evolutionary development, humans ate together, sharing meals and stories, laughing and joking, even though half the crew had been replaced twice over due to casualties sustained in battles that grew more desperate with each passing week of this terrible conflict. Did you hear about Thompson? Corporal Rodriguez asked, grinning around a mouthful of something the humans called scrambled eggs that looked like protein waste too. Thelsh's eyes and smelled even worse to his sensitive nose shot down 3 Devourer fighters with a damaged railgun and a prayer, then crash-landed his bird on an asteroid and walked away with nothing but a bruised ego and some colorful language. The table erupted in laughter, and someone started singing a song about Thompson's piloting skills that was anatomically impossible and mathematically improbable, but funny in ways that transcended language barriers between species and cultures. Thelsh noticed that Ensign Park was not laughing, her eyes distant and her food untouched, and he had learned to recognize the signs of grief in humans over his weeks serving alongside them. Park had lost her brother in the Battle of Titan, one of 8,000 human casualties in a battle the Concordat considered a marginal tactical victory because they had destroyed a Devourer staging area at such terrible cost. You okay, Park? Chen asked, her hand on the younger woman's shoulder in a gesture of comfort that Concordat species rarely used because physical touch was reserved for mating in combat in most civilized cultures. Just thinking about Danny, Park said quietly. And the table went silent in respect for her loss and her pain that they all shared in different ways. He died well, Rodriguez said, which sounded harsh to Thelsh's ears, but seemed to comfort Park in ways he could not fully understand or explain to his superiors back home. Took out a hive ship's propulsion system and saved the colony. Below from bombardment. And they named a school after him on New Chicago, and the kids there will remember what he did for them. This was another human peculiarity. They honored their dead with names on buildings and statues and ceremonies, keeping the memory of the fallen alive through story and ritual that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. The Concordat cremated their dead efficiently and moved on because dwelling on loss reduced combat effectiveness and damaged morale among surviving personnel who needed to focus on current threats, but humans seemed to gain strength from remembering, their grief transforming into determination, and their losses becoming fuel for the fire that drove them forward into battles that rational beings would flee from. Immediately, the alarm klaxons interrupted breakfast, and the crew moved with practiced efficiency to their battle stations, their casual demeanor vanishing like smoke as professional warriors emerged from friendly humans in seconds. Devourer attack on the Churchill. Coordinates transmitted to all fleet elements, the comm officer announced, her voice steady, despite the implications of what she was reporting to the fleet. The Churchill was a human frigate that had been disabled 3 days ago in Devourer-controlled space, her crew alive but stranded, and Concordat Command had written them off as lost with the standard protocols for such situations: plot, intercept, course. Captain Miller ordered from his chair, his weathered face grim with determination that Thelsh had seen before in humans who were about to do something tactically insane. Captain, the Churchill is behind enemy lines, Thelsh protested, his translator adding urgency modifiers that probably did not translate properly into human language concepts and emotional contexts. Concordat doctrine requires abandoning disabled vessels in contested space to avoid further casualties, and a rescue mission would require penetrating a Devourer fleet concentration with minimal support from other Allied vessels. Miller looked at him with eyes that had seen too many battles and lost too many friends, and his smile was sad, but unwavering in its conviction and certainty. Lucky. I know your people have sensible rules about acceptable losses and calculated risks, but we have a rule too. We do not leave our people behind, ever, for any reason. Regardless of cost, you could lose your entire battle group trying to save one ship with 300 crew, Thelsh said, his scales flashing distress colors that the entire bridge could see clearly. That is an unacceptable exchange ratio by any rational military standard. And you know that they would understand if you had to abandon them to save the rest of the fleet, but we would not understand, Miller said quietly. And the bridge crew nodded in agreement with their captain's words and his decision to attempt the impossible. Those are our people on that ship, our friends and crewmates, and some of us have family on the Churchill, and we are going to get them out or die trying, because that is what humans do. The Valiant lead a battle group of 12 ships into their course plotted through the densest concentrations of enemy vessels. And Thelsh watched the tactical display with the certainty that he was about to die alongside these insane humans. The battle was chaos. Human ships weaving through Devourer formations, their weapons blazing, and several vessels took catastrophic damage, but kept fighting while their crews rerouted power and sealed breaches with emergency protocols. The Valiant's shields failed. Her hull breached in 3 places, and Thelsh found himself helping human crew members seal bulkheads and rescue trapped personnel because standing around was not an option during crisis situations. Got you, Commander, Corporal Williams shouted, pulling Thelsh from a corridor filling with toxic atmosphere. Her strength impossible in the crushing gravity, but somehow real and life-saving. They reached the Churchill, attached boarding tubes, and evacuated the crew in 12 minutes flat while holding off Devourer assault ships with everything the battle group could throw at the enemy. 2 human ships were destroyed covering the retreat, the Monarch and the Defiant, their crews buying time with their lives while the Churchill's crew scrambled aboard rescue vessels in organized chaos. Captain Miller watched the casualty report scroll across his screen, his jaw tight with grief and anger. But when the Churchill was secure, he gave the order to withdraw, with steady voice. All ships return to friendly space and honor the fallen by living well, he said, and the battered battle group limped home with their rescued comrades and their devastating losses back in the mess hall that night. The crew held a memorial for the 800 personnel lost in the rescue operation. And Thelsh watched them grieve and laugh and sing songs about the dead who would never be forgotten. Why? He asked Captain Miller. Genuinely confused about human psychology, despite months of observation and study, why pay such a terrible price for so few saved, when the math makes no sense? Miller handed him a drink, something called whiskey that burned going down but warmed from within. And the captain's smile was sad but certain in ways that transcended simple explanation, because math is not everything. Lucky. And because the 300 we saved are not numbers but people with names and families and futures. And because if we start calculating who is worth saving and who is not, then we lose the very thing that makes us human in the first place. Thelsh drank the whiskey and listened to humans sing about their dead. And he realized that he had been adopted by this pack of insane warriors who would die for him without hesitation or calculation. It was the most terrifying and comforting feeling he had ever experienced in his long life of service to the Concordat. The Devourer swarm had reached the core worlds of the Concordat, and the council chambers on Harmonious Prime were filled with the sound of species arguing about survival versus honor in debates that had no good answer still. SSH attended the emergency session via holographic link from the Valiant, his scales shifting through colors that reflected the exhaustion and stress of 6 months of continuous warfare that had claimed billions of lives. Across dozens of worlds, we must retreat to the sanctuary line. High Chancellor Veltros announced, her voice carrying the weight of a decision. That would doom 12 systems and 4 billion civilians. To devour consumption and death, our projections show that we cannot hold the current perimeter against the swarm's numbers, and a strategic withdrawal will preserve our military strength for the defense of the remaining core worlds and our species' survival. The assembled representatives of 47 species murmured agreement. There are various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the translators struggled to process into coherent meaning for all participants. Hologram materialized beside Thelsh, her human form small, compared to many species present, but her presence commanding attention through sheer force of personality and reputation earned through blood. The United Earth government votes no on the retreat proposal, she said, her words dropping into the council chambers like stones into still water and creating ripples of shock throughout the assembly. You cannot vote on Concordat military strategy, Chancellor Veltros protested, her ceremonial robes rippling with agitation that her species used to display emotional states to others. Clearly, you are junior members who have been part of our alliance for only 6 months, and you do not have the authority or experience to challenge decisions made by species who have maintained galactic civilization for 10,000 years. Then we withdraw our forces from Concordat Command, Admiral Chen replied, her tone polite, but absolutely firm in ways that Thelsh had learned meant humans were about to do something dramatic and probably suicidal. Earth will defend the systems you plan to abandon, and we invite any Concordat species who wish to stand with us to join our defensive efforts against the Devourer. Advance. The council chambers erupted in chaos. Dozens of species speaking at once, some in support and others in opposition, while the translators simply gave up and displayed error messages across multiple screen stills. Watched Captain Miller's reaction on the Valiant's bridge, and the human captain was smiling with grim satisfaction that suggested he had expected exactly this outcome from the political discussions. We are really doing this? Thelsh asked, his scales displaying colors that mixed fear and excitement in patterns his species used when facing impossible challenges that might somehow succeed, defending 12 systems with insufficient forces against an enemy that has broken every other defensive line. We are really doing this, Miller confirmed, and his crew began preparing the ship for what military historians would later call the Battle of Galactic Prime. The turning point of the Devourer War. The human fleet numbered only 300 ships, against a Devourer swarm of over 2,000 vessels, and the Concordat forces that chose to stay added another 500 ships to the desperate defensive effort. Thelsh had transmitted every byte of data from the battle plans to Concordat intelligence, knowing they would study human tactics with academic interest, even while disapproving of the strategic insanity about to unfold. Devourers arrived at Galactic Prime in a wave of organic horror, their hive ships blotting out the stars. And the Concordat fleet began standard defensive bombardment from maximum range using protocols refined over millennia. Human fleet did something different, and Thelsh watched the tactical display with growing horror as United Earth vessels accelerated toward the enemy at speeds that stressed their hulls to breaking points all ships. Close to knife fighting range, Admiral Chen ordered, her voice calm despite ordering tactics that violated every principle of space. Combat doctrine developed by civilized species prepared boarding parties and ramming solutions. And remember that we hold this line or we die trying, because those are the only two options available to us today. The human ships crashed into the Devora formations like hammers into glass, their weapons blazing at point-blank range. And what followed was not battle, but organized chaos that somehow worked despite being tactically insane. The Valiant shook as Devourer bioweapons tore through her shields. And Thelsh found himself helping damage control teams seal breaches, while human crew members worked with efficiency born from months of desperate fighting. Captain,
We have a hive ship on collision course,
the navigator shouted, her hands flying across her console as she tried to plot an evasion that would not expose their damaged flank ramming speed. Miller ordered, and Thelsh's translator froze for a moment. Because surely it had misunderstood the captain's intention in this critical moment, sir, that will destroy us, the weapons officer protested. His face pale, but his hands steady on his controls as he prepared to follow orders, and it will destroy them too. Which is an acceptable trade, Miller replied. And the Valiant accelerated toward the hive ship, while her crew strapped into emergency positions and prepared for impact at the last moment. The weapons officer fired every torpedo in their magazines directly into the hive ship's core, and Miller pulled the Valiant into a hard turn that stressed the hull beyond safety margins. The hive ship exploded, its biological components unable to withstand the concentrated fire at zero range, and the shockwave caught the Valiant and sent her tumbling through space with systems. Failing across all decks, Thelsh regained consciousness to find the bridge in darkness, except for emergency lighting. And Captain Miller was slumped in his chair, with blood running down his face from a head wound status. Miller asked, his voice steady, despite obvious pain and probable concussion from the impact that should have killed. Everyone aboard, we are alive. Somehow, the engineering officer reported over internal comms, her laughter slightly hysterical, but genuine with relief at their impossible survival throughout the battle space. Human ships were executing similar maneuvers, ramming Devourer vessels, launching boarding parties into suicide runs, and using damaged ships as improvised weapons against enemy formations, the destroyer Havoc, her reactor already critical and her crew evacuating, accelerated into a Devourer capital ship, while her captain transmitted a final message that became legend among both human and Concordat forces. This is Captain Torres of the Havoc. And I am clearing Lucky's bar tab, he said, referencing some joke between the crew that Thelsh did not understand, but made human voices laugh and cry simultaneously. The Havoc impacted the capital ship at relativistic speeds, and the resulting explosion took out 3 more Devourer vessels in a chain reaction that turned the tide of the battle in that. Torthelsh watched it happen from the Valiant's damaged bridge, tears running down his face in a display of emotion. His species considered shameful, but he could not control in this moment. Captain Torres had died for him. For a stupid joke about drinks at a bar, for an alien he had known for only a few months, and the sacrifice was so fundamentally human that it broke something in Thelsh's understanding of warfare. The battle raged for 18 hours, and when the Devourers finally retreated, they left behind the wreckage of over 800 of their ships, a loss they had never sustained in a single engagement. The human fleet had lost 120 vessels, a casualty rate of 40% that should have broken any military force in history. But the survivors were already organizing rescue operations and planning. The next battle, Admiral Chen's face appeared on every screen, her uniform scorched and her expression exhausted but triumphant in ways that inspired even the most pessimistic Concordat officers watching from safety. We held the line, she said simply, and those 4 words would be carved on monuments across a dozen. Worlds that still existed because humans had refused to abandon Themthalsh, sat in the damaged Bridge of the Valiant and watched human crew members grieving their dead while simultaneously joking about close calls and planning repairs. With unbreakable morale, they had lost 40% of their forces, and they were laughing, crying, singing, and preparing for the next battle all at once, with emotional complexity that his species had forgotten. The Concordat Council sent an emergency message requesting immediate strategic consultations with human military command. Their previous certainty about retreat, placed by desperate hope that perhaps this war could actually be won, Thalsh transmitted his response with scales displaying colors of pride and terror mixed together. The humans have shown us how to fight, and now we must show them we can learn. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the Devourers had appeared in civilized space, the galaxy had hope that survival might be possible after all. The final offensive against the Devourer home clusters took 9 months of brutal warfare that tested every species in the Concordat to their limits and beyond what most had believed possible before. Humanity joined their Allion Ceethals, stood on the observation deck of the flagship Unity, watching the combined fleet prepare for the assault that would either end the Devourer threat forever or break the Alliance in catastrophic defeats. 3,000 ships from 48 species filled the space around the staging area, but the casual observer would notice immediately that the fleet formations had changed from traditional Concordat doctrine to something new, and strange human vessels served as the spearhead of every attack group, their willingness to accept casualties providing the breakthrough force. While Concordat ships provided supporting fire and technical superiority from positions that maximized their strengths and minimized exposure at works, Admiral Krentel said, her antennae waving in patterns that her species used to express reluctant admiration mixed with lingering concern about methods employed. The combination of human aggression and Concordat technology creates a force multiplier that neither species could achieve alone. But the cost in human lives continues to disturb our analysts and ethicists. The final battle lasted 6 days, and Thelsh watched from the Unity's bridge as human marines boarded the primary Devourer hive complex, fighting through organic corridors that no Concordat species would have survived for minutes. Helmet camera feeds showed scenes that would fuel nightmares for years. Humans fighting hand-to-hand with Devourer warriors in zero gravity, using knives and bare hands when ammunition ran out, refusing to retreat even when wounded or dying. Sergeant Maria Santos, her armor breached and her life support failing, held a corridor alone for 12 minutes while her squad evacuated wounded Concordat personnel from a collapsed section, and her final words became part of human military tradition. "Tell my kids I died doing something that mattered," she said. And then she detonated her armor's power core, collapsing the corridor and buying her squad the time they needed to escape. The Devourer hive complex fell, its queen destroyed, and the remaining swarm scattered into deep space without the coordination that had made them unstoppable for so many generations of galactic history. The victory celebration on Harmonious Prime was subdued. The joy of survival mixed with grief for the 3 million beings who had died in the war. 2 million of them human, despite humanity representing only one species among 48. Sheesh walked through the memorial gardens, where the names of the dead were carved in crystal that would last for millennia, and he found Admiral Chen standing before the human section in silence. "We won," he said, his scales displaying colors of victory and sorrow mixed together in patterns that had no traditional name in his species. It's emotional vocabulary, but you paid such a terrible price. And I still do not understand why you were willing to sacrifice so much for species you had just met. Chen looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death but remained fundamentally kind, despite the horrors she had witnessed and ordered throughout the long campaign, because it was the right thing to do, she said simply, as if that explanation was sufficient justification for 2 million deaths and countless acts of heroism that defied rational calculation. The post-war integration proved more difficult than the war itself in many ways, and the Concordat Council struggled to determine how to incorporate humanity into galactic civilization without fundamentally changing everything. Fear of human military capability competed with gratitude for human sacrifice, and the debates about humanity's role in the new Concordat lasted for months. Without clear resolution or consensus, the compromise solution was both practical and insulting. Human sections on every joint station. Reinforced areas where humans could operate at their preferred gravity and atmospheric pressure. Carefully separated from other speciothels, hated the segregation. Having lived among humans for over a year and learned that their capacity for violence was matched by their capacity for friendship and loyalty and kindness, we saved them, and they are afraid of us, Captain Miller said, his tone bitter as he reviewed the council's integration proposals that treated humanity like a dangerous animal to be controlled. Maybe we should have let them retreat to their sanctuary, lying in defended Earth alone instead of bleeding for species who do not trust us despite everything we sacrificed. Some of us trust you, Thelsh said quietly, his scales displaying colors that humans had learned to read as affection and respect earned through shared hardship, and some of us are working to change the Concordat's attitudes. But fear is a powerful force, and changing cultures takes time that we must be patient enough to allow the council appointed Thelsh as Director of Human Concordat Relations, a position that came with diplomatic authority and political headaches that he had never wanted or trained. For his first major speech to the assembled council became historic, broadcast across 48 worlds, and his words carried weight earned through 18 months of fighting. Alongside humanity, we watched in terror as humans entered battle again. His scales displaying colors of absolute honesty that his species used when speaking fundamental truths. We still watch in terror, knowing what they are capable of, understanding the savagery they can unleash, and remembering the battles where they did things we thought impossible. The council chambers were silent. 47 species listening to his words without the usual interruptions and debates that characterize normal political discourse. But I have learned something the Devourers never understood before humanity destroyed them, Thelsh continued, his voice steady despite the importance of what he was saying. Humans choose their targets carefully and deliberately, and they could have conquered us with the same ferocity they used against the Devourers. But instead, they bled for us and died alongside us. He paused, letting his words settle into the minds of beings who had lived their entire lives in civilized comfort without understanding the cost of that comfort, that choice, that restraint despite such enormous capacity for violence, is what makes them truly terrifying to contemplate, he said, and his scales flashed patterns of fear and admiration simultaneously, and it is also what makes them truly invaluable as allies. Because a species that can be savage but chooses not to be is far more trustworthy than species like us, who simply forgot how to fight. The silence stretched for long moments before High Chancellor Valtros spoke, her voice thoughtful rather than dismissive as she considered his perspective carefully. You propose full integration, then? She asked, seeking clarification on his recommendations. For humanity's role in the Concordat's future, I propose that we acknowledge what we lost when we chose civilization over survival instincts, Thelsh replied, his scales displaying colors of conviction, and I propose that we learn from humanity instead of fearing them. Because the next threat to galactic civilization might not be as straightforward as the Devourers. The vote took 3 days of debate. But ultimately, the Council approved full Concordat membership for humanity with all rights and responsibilities that entailed for participation. The segregated human sections were redesigned as cultural centers, where other species could experience Earth gravity and atmosphere in controlled environments, learning about humanity rather than being protected from the military academies across the Concordat. Began teaching human tactics alongside traditional doctrine, and the textbooks included case studies of battles that had seemed like suicide missions, but somehow succeeded. Museums displayed artifacts from the war, damaged armor from human marines, fragments of ships that had rammed Devourer vessels, and recordings of final transmissions from captains who had sacrificed everything late at night. In officer clubs across the galaxy, veteran soldiers from 48 species gathered to share stories about the war and the humans who had taught them how to win. Thalsh attended one such gathering on Harmonious Prime, his scales displaying colors of contentment as he listened to a Valtra's officer describe the Battle of Kaleeth Prime with awe and respect. I watched the valiant ram, that hive ship, and I thought they were insane, the officer said, her tentacles waving in animation as she told the story. But then I understood that sometimes insanity is just courage that has not been properly appreciated by those who lack the will to be courageous themselves. Someone started playing a recording of human military songs, the voices of dead soldiers singing about glory and sacrifice and the bonds between warriors that transcended species and culture. Rethel SSH listened to Captain Torres's voice singing about far travels and fallen friends, and he raised his glass in salute to the human who had died clearing his bar. The war was over, but its lessons would shape galactic civilization for generations to come, and humanity had permanently changed what it meant to be part of the Concordat. They had shown the civilized galaxy that peace was worth defending with violence when necessary, that sacrifice for others was not weakness, but strength, and that the capacity for savagery was not something to be feared in those who chose restraint.